The psychological effect from long-term isolation has a profound impact on the human psyche. Human beings are built around routine. We structure our lives through repetition because repetition creates stability. You wake up, drive the same roads, recognize the same faces, and trust that the world around you will continue functioning the way it always has. In the early stages of the infection, isolation was slowly forced. All flights around the world were grounded, borders were closed, and all telecommunication systems within the exclusion zone were abruptly halted. If you are still unaware of the lore behind the Knox Virus, be sure to check out my video covering the entire timeline. The lore is pretty crazy, and I suggest giving it a watch. The Russian sleep experiment is a well-known creepypasta, often presented as a leaked Soviet-era experiment. Researchers supposedly kept 5 prisoners awake for weeks using an experimental gas stimulant inside of a sealed chamber. As the days passed, the subjects reportedly descended into paranoia, violent psychosis, self-mutilation, and complete psychological collapse, eventually becoming obsessed with staying awake at any cost. In the late 1800s, a similar experiment was used on dogs with similar effects. Though sleep deprivation is far more lethal than social isolation, there can be some comparisons between the two, such as cognitive declination, emotional instability, increase in stress hormones, memory impairment, anxiety, paranoia, and even hallucinations. During the first few weeks of complete isolation from human interactions and society as a whole, survival still feels human. You're searching for other people, listening to voices, hoping someone else is still alive somewhere beyond the silence. Every distant gunshot feels significant because it means another person might still exist. Cars litter the roads, which makes your brain think that people are still here. However, once you fail to see other people after a prolonged period of time, your brain attempts to adapt. Without other humans to interrupt thought patterns, cognition becomes increasingly internalized. Decisions that would normally be influenced by conversation of others now occur in complete isolation. This causes a subtle narrowing of perspective. The world stops feeling shared and starts feeling entirely self-centered. In practical terms, attention becomes more rigid. Small details begin to carry disproportionate weight. A door left slightly open is no longer just an oversight. It becomes a question the mind refuses to drop. A distant sound is no longer filtered through social reassurance. It is processed alone, without correction or confirmation from anyone else. This is not fear in the traditional sense. It is cognitive amplification caused by lack of feedback. As the months progress, perception of time begins to distort in small but measurable ways. Without social anchors, conversations, schedules tied to other people, or external obligations, as the days pass, they all start to feel the same. Emergency broadcast suddenly interrupts normal programming. Streets slowly empty. Entire neighborhoods become strangely quiet, long before they become dangerous. At first, people would convince themselves the situation was temporary. Authorities would regain control. People thought that the quarantines would work, and things would return to normal in just a few days. But as those weeks pass, society begins collapsing in a way the human brain struggles to process. The power grid fails. Supply chains disappear. Homes are abandoned so quickly that entire lives are left sitting untouched inside them. Half-eaten meals remain on kitchen tables. Cars are still parked in driveways as if their owners planned on coming back. And during those first few months, survival still feels human. The roads become empty. The houses no longer dress per season. And weeks pass without seeing another living person. And that's where the real psychological effect begins to pay its toll. By the 4th month of complete isolation, the psychological effects are no longer subtle. The mind has already adapted to silence, repetition, and the absence of human contact. What once felt temporary now feels permanent, and that realization fundamentally changes the way a person interprets both themselves and the world around them. At this stage, survival is no longer driven by urgency. It is instead driven by conditioning. The person still wakes up at the same time, they still check windows, monitor supplies, maintain the generator, and follow carefully constructed routines, but the emotional connection to those actions has weakened significantly. This is one of the most dangerous effects of prolonged isolation. The human mind depends heavily on external stimulation to maintain emotional balance and cognitive flexibility. Without conversation, shared experiences, or unpredictable social interactions, thought patterns begin looping inward continuously. Over time, this creates a psychological environment where minor thoughts, anxieties, and observation expands far beyond normalcy. Hypervigilance slowly becomes ingrained. The brain begins treating uncertainty as a threat. Every unexplained sound demands attention. Every environmental inconsistency becomes mentally exhausting to ignore. A curtain moving slightly in the wind can trigger suspicion. A missing item can spiral into obsessive retracing of previous actions. Not because the person is irrational, but because isolation removes the normal feedback system that regulates perception. Under ordinary circumstances, human interactions constantly stabilizes the mind. Conversations interrupt repetitive thinking. Social environments provide emotional calibration. Other people unconsciously reassures us that our interpretations of reality are reasonable. Eventually, your brain starts treating every unknown thing as a possible threat. And because there's nobody to talk to, your thoughts never get interrupted. In normal life, human interactions constantly break up negative thinking. Conversations distract us. Other people help us stay grounded without us even realizing it. But after 4 straight months left alone, your own thoughts become the loudest thing in the world. And that's why long-term isolation can feel mentally exhausting, even when nothing dangerous is happening. After enough time alone in Project Zomboid, survivors eventually reaches a point where isolation no longer feels like a condition they are enduring. Instead, it becomes who they are. By this stage, the routines are fully ingrained. Every moment through the safe house feels automatic. Entire days pass with barely a word spoken out loud. The survivor still eats, sleeps, repairs equipment, and checks the outside world for danger. But emotionally, the connections to those actions has almost disappeared entirely. They are alive, but no longer feels connected to living. The human mind can adapt to almost anything if given enough time, and that includes loneliness. But adaptation does not always mean recovery. Sometimes adaptation simply means learning how to exist inside something harmful long enough that it starts feeling normal. That is the final psychological effect of prolonged isolation. The survivor stops remembering what normal human life actually felt like. Conversations become distant memories. Emotional reactions become weaker. The idea of sitting in a crowded room, hearing multiple voices at once, or simply existing around other people begins to feel almost unreal. Not frightening, just unfamiliar. And eventually, the silence becomes comforting in a way that would have disturbed them months prior. That's what makes the outcome so tragic. The isolation doesn't destroy the survivor all at once. It slowly removes pieces of them over time. Motivation, emotional warmth, curiosity, social instinct, until survival itself becomes the only thing left. Not hope, not purpose, just continuation. At this point, even the world around them feels emotionally frozen. Entire towns decay in silence while nature slowly reclaims everything people once built. Homes sit untouched for months. Roads crack apart. Power is long gone. The survivor moves through the remains of civilization like a ghost walking through memories that no longer belong to anyone. And deep down, they understand something terrifying. Even if another person appeared tomorrow, they may no longer know how to connect with them the same way again. Because isolation changes people. Not dramatically, not all at once. It changes them quietly, until the person they used to be slowly fades into someone built entirely around surviving alone. That's why the horror of Project Zomboid was never just about death. It was about what happened before death. The slow mental decline that comes from existing too long in a world without human connection. A world where every day feels identical, every room feels empty, and every thought echoes endlessly because there's nobody left to interpret it. And in the end, the survivor may still be breathing, but psychologically, the person they once were disappeared a long time ago. This is how you died.